I-V-M.
Ramya, what time is it?
What time is it, Varun?
It's story time. In 2013, a Dutch scientist, Dr. Mark Post, cooked and ate a lamb burger live on TV. Now, why was this news? It's because this was no ordinary burger. It wasn't made by raising and slaughtering lambs. It was grown from a small sample of cells without even needing to kill the animal. The entire project cost $330,000, bankrolled by the Netherlands government and by Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google.
Now, that just sounds like very expensive science fiction. But it's something that's been a long time coming. People have been writing about growing meat outside animals since the last century. Winston Churchill wrote in 1930s that we would one day eat only the parts of the animal that we need with the help of science, rather than growing the whole animal with its feathers, beaks, and hooves and all the other stuff we don't usually eat. We've talked about how inefficient animals are as a source of food, and this is exactly why. And of course, it's not just the amount of calories and land we would save from needing to feed animals up for slaughter. Meat grown directly from cells or cell-based meat cuts out the middle animal, so it doesn't involve animal waste, slaughter, and the antibiotics widely used in industrial animal rearing. This is why it's also sometimes called clean meat, as a nod to the clean energy movement, because it's just cleaner.
80 years after Churchill wrote about a cell-based meat future, but only a couple of years after Mark Post's famous lamb burger, Dr. Uma Valeti started the world's first cell-based meat company called Memphis Meats. Uma is a Mayo Clinic-trained cardiologist who was born in Vijayawada in Andhra Pradesh. Somewhere along the way, he realized that as a doctor, he would only save a couple of thousand lives during his lifetime. But by transforming how meat is made, he could save billions of human and trillions of animal lives. And that was just the beginning. In 2016, when Memphis Meats held a tasting for the world's first cell-based meatball, there were only 3 companies working on cell-based meat. Today, there are around 40 all over the world, creating different kinds of cell-based meats, including chicken, pork, and many kinds of seafood. And these companies have attracted attention from some serious heavyweights. Visionaries like Bill Gates and Richard Branson, and big meat companies like Tyson Foods and Cargill have invested in Memphis Meats. And Dr. Mark Post has his own company called Mosa Meat, working on making similar burgers to the one he had in 2013, but at a tiny fraction of the cost.
Both Mosa Meat and Memphis Meats will have commercial products out in the next couple of years and will be cost competitive with conventional meat a few years later. The product is awaiting regulatory approvals for launch in the US currently, with EU, Singapore, Greater China, Israel, and India expected to follow suit.
That brings us to our guest for the day, Dr. Sandhya Sriram, who has flown in from Singapore to record this podcast. Sandhya co-founded Shiok Meats, the first cell-based meat company in Southeast Asia, and is making cell-based shrimp, crab, and lobster. I'm Varun Deshpande, Managing Director at the Good Food Institute, India.
And I'm Ramya Ramurthy, the Communications Specialist at the Good Food Institute, India. And you're joining us on Feeding 10 Billion.
Welcome, Sandhya. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
Welcome, Sandhya. Thank you for making the trek all the way from Singapore to Mumbai.
Oh, my pleasure.
Our first question for you is the most obvious one. Tell us, why did you decide to start Shiok Meats?
Okay, so personal reasons was I was just tired of working for someone. No, other than that, I think I definitely knew I wanted to do something on my own. I first stepped into entrepreneurship about 4 years ago, and ever since I've wanted to do something on my own full-time because my previous ventures were part-time. And if I did something on my own, it had to make perfect sense in terms of sustainability, helping the environment, helping people, animals, whatever it is. That's my passion all my life. Yeah, so that was personal reason. I think business-wise, the whole clean meat industry was coming up. The first time I read about clean meat was about 5 years ago when the first hamburger was made in Netherlands by Dr. Mark Post. And ever since I was intrigued if the stem cells that I was growing in the lab as a scientist at that time can be eaten. So not that I ate it. Not that I ate it, but I think it intrigued that thought in me. And I started reading about it so much that I was almost to an extent paranoid and at the same time so into it that I was like, I have to do something about it. And that was kind of the career choice that I decided to do, and I started a clean meat company.
And there was a progression of companies that led to Shiok Meats, because you talked about previous ventures that eventually led to Shiok. Could you just name them?
Yeah, sure. My first company was called Biotech in Asia, which is a science news website. And we started off as a blog, that is myself and a couple of my friends. And then it became a business over time. I was a writer for that, and I used to manage some of the other writers as well. And that's when I first came across Mark Post's idea. And I was so intrigued that I started writing to him for actually getting an interview of him for the website. That didn't work out. But then I think a couple of years later, Memphis Meats first came up from the US, and I actually interviewed them for the website. And I interviewed another couple of clean meat companies that were coming up at that time. And soon after, I think 2 years later, I started another company, which was a career development mentorship platform for students in science. That's called SciGlow. But both of these ventures were part-time for me. And I think it was time last year for me to decide to quit my job and do this full-time.
Awesome.
Super interesting. Could you tell me a little bit, especially for our listeners, how biotech is currently eating the world? Because we know it's doing extremely well across all sectors, and especially in food, right? And that's obviously directly applicable from your previous work.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of it, right from food to animals to environment to what you eat, what you breathe, what you live on is all biotech indirectly. I mean, the air you breathe is oxygen, which is biotech. The food that you eat is plants and animals, which is biotech. And currently what's happening is I think the world is finally starting to recognize that biotech is not just pharma or drugs anymore. It's actually everything else. So even normal fermentation, like how you make yogurt from milk is biotech. How you make sourdough bread is biotech. So if you think of it, we've been doing biotech for all our lives, but I think now we're giving it a label. And it's honestly eating the whole world, yes.
I love that. So, okay, with respect to biotech, could you talk a little bit more about the process of cell-based meat and what exactly it is? So clean meat, cell-based meat, cultured meat, it's called by many names, of course. But could you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So cell-based meat is basically making meat in a controlled, clean environment without using any hormones or antibiotics or synthetic compounds by using the stem cell or a cell from an animal. So every animal on this earth, inclusive of human beings, have something called stem cells. This is kind of like the birth cell of sorts. And this stem cell generally never dies. You know, it's like a cell that's very strong and actually can grow many generations and actually never dies. So what biotech has used initially stem cells for is to do stem cell therapy in human beings or to do drug discovery and so on. But 5 years back, one of the scientists from Netherlands found out that stem cells can actually be used to make meat, which is very true because throughout my scientific experience being a researcher, we were trying to grow organs in the lab using stem cells. Meat is a mixture of organs, basically. It's muscle, fat, connective tissue, blood, and so on. So what we do in clean meat is use stem cells from the animal, grow them in the lab to actually make meat. So that way you don't have to kill animals. It's not fake, synthetic, or mock meat. It's actually real meat because the cell is the meat. And the taste and the smell is inherent. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what cell-based meats are.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we hear a lot about, you mentioned the Netherlands scientist, which is, of course, Dr. Mark Post. We hear a lot about the cost of these early projects, right? So I think Dr. Mark Post's burger, which he ate live on TV, the R&D for that burger cost $330,000. Could you tell me a little bit about how these R&D projects come to market and how that cost is driven down by technology?
Right. So when you first start anything in the lab, let it be drug discovery or clean meat, it is going to be super expensive because you're starting off kind of from the unknown. You'll have to do a lot of trial and error, a lot of experiments to kind of figure out what works for you. So in our case, for example, it costs us about $5,000 to make a kilogram of shrimp meat. But this doesn't take into account any of the manpower that's put in. So it's just the consumables and the lab space that we use to make the kilogram of shrimp meat. But looking at it, the cost will drive down as you scale up and once you figure out the technology. So once you know A leads to B, B leads to C, then it's easy to just from that process scale it up. And as consumers start buying it, the cost will go down as well.
So, Sandhya, speaking of scaling the costs down but scaling up the business, you are based in Singapore. We established that. And your company deals with cellular aquaculture, which is recreating crab, shrimp, and lobster meat from cells. Was that choice a natural one, given that you're based in Singapore and they consume so much seafood? Or was it something else that was based on other decisions?
So a couple of reasons for why we went into seafood or cellular aquaculture. First reason was, yes, we are based in Singapore. We are based in Asia, where we consume a lot of seafood, a lot of crustaceans specifically. When compared to the US, where shrimp is generally eaten as a shrimp cocktail or a shrimp sushi, in Singapore or the rest of Southeast Asia, we eat shrimp in every form, shape, size, texture. We make shrimp crackers, we make shrimp noodles, we make shrimp sauce, shrimp paste, shrimp oil, and all of it. The second reason was no other company was looking at crustaceans. We wanted to pioneer in one certain type of technology and be the first and probably the only ones doing crustaceans. So that was the second reason. Third reason, as a business, it has to make economic sense. So just the shrimp market alone is $40 billion globally. And in Asia Pacific, it's $25 billion US dollars. So why not? Those were the three business sort of reasons, but personally there was a reason as well. So a couple of years ago, I had visited a couple of shrimp farms in Vietnam and Thailand as part of a recreational thing to take my son and have fun. And I was so appalled by the way that shrimps were growing. They were growing in sewage water. They were growing in pig farm runoffs. The reasons being shrimps actually, they feed on dirt. They are bottom feeders. So what the farms were doing is exploiting that and growing them in sewage water so that they don't have to spend money for clean water and feed. And because they're grown in sewage water, all of these shrimps were then dunked into huge vats of antibiotics to get them clean for a couple of hours before they were sent off for human consumption. And I, like any biotech person, went over to the shrimp farm guys and I was like, what do you do with the antibiotic solution? And he's like, oh, we just dump it in the farm behind. And that's where they were growing rice and everything else that humans were consuming. So this was completely appalling for me. I am actually a vegetarian by choice, so I don't eat seafood or meat. But after seeing that, I would have never tasted shrimp in my life. And I actually told my husband, who actually eats meat and seafood, that you should probably stop eating shrimps and crabs and lobsters, but eat other stuff for now. It's okay. It's that kind of a situation. So yeah, it got me thinking.
This is the fascinating part of it. And by the way, clean meat is called clean meat for various reasons. It's cleaner. It's like renewable energy, so it's better for the environment. So it's kind of like clean energy, but also for the reason that you just outlined, right? So it's devoid of the current challenges facing the meat production system, which include animal waste, but they also include feeding crustaceans filth, right? So that's just one of those things that is really promising about this sector. Moving forward, I think one thing which would be great to understand is what you see the future of this sector. So you mentioned that Asia is one of the biggest markets for you, right? How would you see yourself scaling up beyond Singapore and scaling up from where you are right now to service that whole market and perhaps even beyond?
Right. So we are working on a hybrid model. So the first model is, yes, we are going to set up our own manufacturing plants to produce shrimp meat, crab and lobster meat. So the first mini sort of a pilot plant that we're planning to set up is in Singapore. But eventually what we want to do is set up various plants, for example, one in India or a couple in India because we have a lot of people to feed, and maybe one in Malaysia, one in Indonesia, one in Hong Kong, and so on. But at the same time, another business strategy for us is we have actually patented the technology or in the process of patenting our technology for the actual isolation of the stem cells from shrimp and how do you turn them into meat in the lab. So we want to license the technology to other clean meat companies or other research companies or other food companies that are willing to license the technology and actually produce shrimp meat.
Okay, changing tack for a second. So both you and your co-founder, Kai, you left government jobs at Singapore's A-STAR, which is the Agency for Science, Technology and Research. And I visited there this week. It's fantastic, right? So you left there to start this company at a time when most clean meat companies were focusing on beef or chicken, but not seafood. So how hard was your decision to leave your sort of security and move forward? You've mentioned that you like to start something of your own, but was it difficult to leave that security?
Yeah, it took me 4 years. I ran 2 companies as a part-time co-founder. Took me 4 years mentally. And I think getting that family support as well to kind of quit my job and start this with nothing but a $10,000 check from an angel investor. I think for me, it was personal reason than anything else, more so that I want to use my skills and love for food for something that actually makes sense. For Kai, she was really, really tired of being in academia, publishing papers, getting grants. It just wasn't her cup of tea. And she was looking for an out. And when I told her that I'm doing this, she was so excited that it took her, I think, about 2 weeks to kind of come to the decision. And we both quit our jobs in the next week after that. So that was how the thing happened.
Wait, I should say, I want to interject and say that we love academia and we are looking to stimulate more academic research in this area, by the way. But I do take your point that entrepreneurialism is a very exciting thing to do.
Actually, I wanted to sort of take off from where Varun left and say, there's the part where you start the company and then there are all these elements that have to fall in place like a puzzle. How hard was the rest of it? Deciding to do this is one aspect and then figuring out your team, the sci-tech part, the funding, the product innovation, figuring out what your strategy is going to be and what your USP is going to be. Could you talk us through a bit about that aspect of growing a business?
Yes, it was super hard. It is still super hard. And I think that's what keeps us up every morning. That's what keeps us on our feet and makes us work harder. But honestly, when we started, like I said, we didn't even have a clue if we could isolate stem cells from shrimp. We didn't have a clue whether anybody would fund this project. We kind of were in the middle of searching for lab spaces to do this because this is not a company where you can just use a kitchen to make the food. You need a proper biotech, like a high-tech lab to isolate your stem cells and work on it and so on. So when we started end of August, all we had was like I said, the $10,000 check and a lot of passion between Kai and me. And to tell you the truth, both of us were so confident that any animal you give us, we can isolate stem cells with it. We have about 25 years of experience between the two of us combined. And we have worked with so many animals in the past when we're doing research that we were quite sure that if I cut open a shrimp, I can get out the stem cells. So pretty much in September, what we did, because it was so hard to find a lab space for doing like some random idea. And in Singapore, the whole biohacker culture, which is there in the US, is not there. So we rented an offshore lab in an island next to Singapore, which is where the Marine Institute of Singapore is placed. We went on a boat in the morning at like 8 o'clock, went there, I cut open a couple of shrimps and I isolated stem cells and it worked. So that gave us a bit of confidence to, okay, let's do this, let's go ahead and do it. And when we took pictures of the cells and I sent it back to this investor, he circulated that picture to his entire group of investor friends. So we raised another $250,000 in the next 4 weeks. So that's how it all started.
And I have to add here that you've just raised $4.6 million in the last round of funding. And it's the first time Y Combinator has ever invested in this field. So that's a pretty big goal to achieve within a year of existence. Is that right?
Actually, honestly, Kai and I had given ourselves 12 months time to figure out part of the technology, if it even works, and get about $1 million in funding. So that was our aim.
So you've exceeded that wildly.
Yes, so that was our aim. And we had said that if we can't figure this out in the next 12 months, we'll actually quit and go back to our jobs. That was our game plan for life. But things have turned out for the better, for sure. We raised a lot more money. I think YC was a big boost for us. I mean, looking at the technology, it's such a big promise and the field is so large that people want to invest, people want to be part of it. So that's how we're here.
Yeah, sounds easy peasy to me. Okay, question. How far along are you right now in your journey to present a Shiok Meat dim sum to the wider public in restaurants? Because you did a tasting on March 26th at a summit in Singapore, right? And my colleague Elaine Xu from Hong Kong was present and she got to taste this dim sum, which I won't hold that against you, but I just wanted to know when you'll be able to serve this in restaurants so I can also eat it.
Yeah, so we are hoping to launch in 1 or 2 premium restaurants by the end of next year. So that's end of 2020. And we are targeting Singapore and Hong Kong to start off with. So that's probably like your Impossible Burger launching into premium restaurants initially for people to taste and get the feel of it. But it's going to take us another 3 to 5 years to produce it in mass scale for you to go into a supermarket and start buying a bag of Shiok shrimp.
Very cool. All right, that was just the first part of our conversation with Sandhya. Stay tuned. There is much more when we return.
How many times have you motivated yourself to improve your sleep or lose weight or be more productive? How many times have you failed? Hi, my name is Ashton Doctor. Tune into my show, The Habit Coach Podcast, where we focus on creating small, tiny habits to improve your life instead of those big, impossible tasks. So make listening to me a habit every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com or on your favorite podcasting app.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Dr. Sandhya Sriram, the co-founder of Shiok Meats. And she's telling us all about her progress with South Asia's first cell-based meat company focusing on shrimp and other crustaceans. So, Sandhya, could you tell me about your path to market a little bit further? So what's aiding or blocking this in Asia Pacific? What about regulations and what about distribution? Could you talk a little bit about those things?
So 3 things are challenges for any clean meat company, including ours. So first is the cost of the product itself. Like I said, it's costing us $5,000 to make 1 kilogram of shrimp meat. Even the richest person would probably not want to buy that. So we have to bring it down to a price where people can actually afford it. So we're thinking of bringing it down to about $50 a kilogram by the end of next year. So that's possible, but that involves a lot of R&D. So that's what we are doing currently. The second challenge that we have is the regulatory approvals that you mentioned. Every country has its own regulatory approval board. They have different regulations for meats and seafood, for novel foods like us, and so on. So what's been good for us is we have actually been talking to regulators in Singapore, India, and Hong Kong to see how they want to govern this, how they want to put a framework for this. So Singapore has been very forthcoming for that. They are actually including us in a lot of conversations. We are helping them put the framework together. So hopefully in the next 6 to 8 months, we should have something there. The third challenge for us is right now we are growing our meats, let's say in a 1 liter, 2 liter kind of a volume. And that's not enough to even feed our own stuff on a daily basis. So we have to scale up this entire technology. So just imagine a brewery with a lot, huge steel tanks where it's brewing beer, but instead of beer, just think of meat brewing into it. So that's kind of the infrastructure that we need. So I'm talking about 2,000, 5,000, 20,000 liter bioreactors to grow the meat. Currently, none of the companies have reached that scale. We are nowhere close to that scale. But to get there, it's going to take us some time to get there. So that's what it is.
And a bioreactor is just a fermenter, right? Just like with beer, as you said.
Correct. So bioreactor is just a fancy scientific name for a huge vessel where you grow things.
And you mentioned this earlier, but they already used in industry to cultivate yogurt and all kinds of products that people eat all the time.
Yeah, actually, if you think of India, India is the largest producer of vaccines. So we make vaccines in bioreactors or fermenters. So if we can use that technology and the talent, then we can grow this industry quite huge in India as well.
Got it. Yeah, that's actually a super interesting point. And we were at the regulator this past week in India, the FSSAI. What I always say is that, or what we say as an organization is that there are really a couple of things that need to be done by regulators to understand how to regulate this sector. The first thing is designate an entity that would be responsible for this, which in India would be the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India. The second thing is communicate any safety requirements to the companies involved so that they can really be abreast of what's needed, to avoid any unnecessary delays. And the third thing is to focus on what already exists. So regulation for the bio-pharma industry or the food industry more generally, and not make the regulation for this sector so onerous as it would, disadvantage it in the marketplace. That's really what's going to benefit consumers all around at the end of it.
And there was something interesting you mentioned earlier when we were chatting, which was that Singapore, it's very easy. If it's a no, it's right away. But if it's a yes, they give you 12 months and then you have your regulation?
12 weeks, actually.
12 weeks. Oh, my God.
So it's a little fast in Singapore because the country is small and there's only one regulator. And another thing that a lot of people might not know is actually Singapore doesn't grow anything. So we import 95% of the food that we consume, right? From seafood to meat to plants to fruits to everything. So if you have too much of onerous regulations, then it's impossible for us to import all the food that we want to eat. So the regulators are more open to discussing and seeing what kind of novel products want to come into the market.
Which is why we're seeing a lot of the, the big hero products from the US, like the Beyond or Impossible burgers, especially Impossible, making an appearance in places like Hong Kong and Singapore. How long do you think it will take for a product grown in this part of the continent to actually start making its way to that kind of scale, be part of a QSR chain like the Impossible Burger is with Burger King, or, be seen in restaurants more casually, not just with Shiok, but with, say, any other product of this type?
A minimum of 3 years, I think maximum of 5. We should be there. I think most of the clean meat companies are on their way to do that. I think they're just figuring out when to scale up, how to scale up based on the regulations. Honestly, as part of running this company, for me now it is, if I set up a manufacturing plant and start producing meat, and then tomorrow the regulators come and say, this plant doesn't work for you, what's the point then? I would have invested millions of money into that. So that's why we want to keep them in the loop from day one, so that they kind of let us also know what they expect, so that I don't have to set up another facility after spending millions of money setting up one before.
Absolutely. We've been talking about how the government could speed things up, and not just in terms of regulations, but one of the big ways they could give us a huge advantage is by actually backing us with money. And Singapore has shown the lead in that. There's been a corpus of nearly 144 million Singapore dollars set up to help companies in this space. Could you talk us through how this would sort of speed things up for you and other people like you in Singapore innovating in this field?
Yeah, definitely. I think the Singapore government has invested a lot of time and a lot of money into this. $144 million is a lot of money on the outset if you look at it, but actually it's not enough if you want to grow this field really, really big. Like, for example, a lot of plant-based companies have raised billions of dollars, and the clean meat industry is still kind of in the lower or the higher millions or the lower billions. But I think it's a great start. The Singapore government has finally thought about it and actually put out a press release and actually started giving out the money as early as, early this year, to kind of get academics, industry, startups to start looking at the entire field of clean meat.
With respect to those kinds of investments, which are kind of public, large national investments, one of the things that I think is really promising in India is to use it as a scale-up hub, as we mentioned earlier. So talking to the agencies in Singapore, a lot of what they tell me is we have the talent, we have the early part of the value chain, which is the scientific part of this, but we might need partnership with these large countries to figure out manufacturing. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Singapore, honestly, like I said, is such a small country. It's very hard to set up a manufacturing hub, even though the country wants to, but we only have so much land in terms of setting up a huge plant or whatever it is. What we have, yes, it's talent. Yes, it's money. Yes, it's to a mini production facility of sorts. But what we require is talent, space, infrastructure, and a lot of partnership with countries like India or Malaysia or even China to kind of put up this mega manufacturing plant that we want to set up. And honestly speaking, India and China have the best talent for large-scale production of anything to do with biotech or even with vaccines or fermentation. And we do have the infrastructure for it. So why not partner with these industries rather than setting it all up on our own is the question. Yeah.
So what do you need to see on the ground here in India then, in terms of, what kind of talent, what kind of, partnerships, what are you looking for on the ground?
Right. So I've already been scouting in India. I think definitely Shiok Meats, one of our milestones is to set up a manufacturing plant in India in the next couple of years. So we're working with GFI, with you, to kind of scout and see what's out there. I'm trying to work with the other vaccine industries and even the oil and gas industry. I'll come back to that why. But even the oil and gas industry to actually look at talent and infrastructure. So if you look at the oil and gas industry, they use huge vats, like those stainless steel vats. And the people who work there actually know how to scale up technology. Like if you tell them, I can do this in a 1 liter, can you take it to 100 liter? They actually know it like immediately. They can do it. So I think it's looking across industries, across the border to find the talent in the infrastructure.
And do you think India could be that hub for manufacturing and talent in cell-based meat, not just for Asia, but the world? Do you see that potential here? And, any sort of future crystal ball gazing that you want to do in terms of how it could play out in the next couple of years?
I think definitely India has the potential to be a good manufacturing hub for cell-based meats. Maybe starting off with Asia alone, not maybe the West, because the palate in the West is different. The way you produce meats are different. Even the types of meat you produce is very different in the US and in Europe. At least when you look at India, we do have multi-cuisines. We have people who can eat different types of food. And that also has to be taken into consideration. The way you process, what kinds of meats you're working on, and so on. And at the same time, I think India has the greatest potential to start its own clean meat startups. And I hope it happens really, really soon, and a lot of happening things happen in that industry.
So absolutely, Sandhya. There is stuff happening on the ground. As you know, we actually announced the first Center of Excellence in Cellular Agriculture in partnership with the Institute of Chemical Technology earlier this year. So do you have any sort of advice for us? How do you want this institute to sort of grow so that it can enable entrepreneurs like you the most?
My mantra is just do it. I mean, honestly, I think you just have to take that first step, and that first step has been taken by GFI and ICT. CCMB also announced that they are starting to work on sheep meat with the grant that they got $600,000, which is a great start. So like I said, I think we have the talent, the technology and the infrastructure, but it was all being used for the pharma industry, for drug discovery, stem cell therapy and so on. It's just changing that mindset and kind of weaving that people into this industry for them to use their skills and knowledge, but instead of growing an organ or doing drug discovery, make meat.
So Sandhya, you have very ambitious plans for Shiok Meats. You want to not just sell it in Asia Pacific, but you want to take it to the US, you want to take it to Australia. That's a lot of continents to cover. So when do we see that sort of scalability from you, and what part does India play in all of this?
Right. For us, our target market is Asia Pacific, where most of the population lives, and a lot of us eat a lot of crustaceans here. So we're starting off with Singapore and Hong Kong, which are more international kind of markets, and also they have affluent populations. So that's where we're starting off with. But eventually the next set of markets for us is actually China and India and Australia as well. But these markets are huge, and we need local partners, local collaborators to help us with that. And we're already speaking to some of them, but it's going to take a while to get there. Regulations are different, consumer thoughts are different, and all of it. So we're waiting to kind of know more before we enter into a market that we don't understand at this point.
Fascinating. So this conversation is continuing on its meaty path. Please don't go anywhere. We will be back very soon.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you are not following us on social media, please make sure you do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Instagram was a big week for us this week. We crossed 10,000 followers. Also, you should check out the kind of stuff that we do over there. Get a look into the studio. And, see some of the quotes and stuff like that come out, and audiograms and, all that other kind of good stuff. So, let me tell you about two new shows that are coming up, right? So, the first one let me talk to you about is GayBCD. This show is hosted by Farhad and Sunetru. They share the ABCDs of their queer lives and dig into the memories and experiences. Tune in for a new episode every week on Tuesdays. Another show we're really excited to bring you is called Feeding 10 Billion. This show is hosted by Good Food Institute's Varun and Ramya Ramamurthy. They talk to experts in the food industry about rethinking protein and reimagining food systems in India. New episodes out every Tuesday for this show as well. Also, Simplified's completing 150 episodes. My God, I can't believe that we're already there. They need your help to celebrate this milestone. Send us theories, concepts, or questions that you have using the hashtag Simplified150 on Twitter, or send us a DM on Instagram. And Chuck, Naren, and Shrikesh will answer your questions on episode 150. On The Seen and the Unseen, Amit is in conversation with journalist and author Akshay Mukul. They deep dive into his book about the Gita Press. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam is joined by founder and CEO of Markets Mojo, Dr. Mohit Patra. They talk about minimizing risks and maximizing returns and understanding investment behavior. On the Empowering series, Zarina is joined by celebrity fitness coach Bakr Nasser. He talks about the importance of exercising and how he started his own indoor cycling studio, Topspin. On Vartalab, Akash and Naveen talk to Tejinder Singh, the man behind the popular Insta handle Kamakha Photo Artist. On Golgappa, Trupti is joined by Monica Godbole, who shares her experience working on the set and how she found her passionate calling to creativity. On Pulyabazi, Saurabh and Pranay talked to Divyanshu Poddar, co-founder of Rocketeers, India's first solid fuel-powered model rocket kit manufacturer. On Kinetic Living, Coach Urmi shares a workout routine called Seated Twisted on Tabata Tuesdays. And on Thriving Thursdays, she highlights the benefit of nutrient-dense foods. And with that, let's get you on with your show.
Welcome back to our show, Feeding 10 Billion. So, Sandhya, we've spoken about your company, and we've spoken about how, the sector will evolve in terms of clean meat, as well as look at how things would change in the next 5 years. But can we get into a little bit about how you got here as well? Because was this something that was easy for you? I mean, not everyone thinks of chucking their job of 4 years and starting a company. So there is that perception that you've got to have some cushion to land on so that if this goes south, you have something to fall back on. Was that something you had an option of?
Not really. I mean, life's been tough for me. Things started going south when actually my dad passed away when I was 15, and then it was just my mom and me. And basically, I had to get educated to feed the family. So that's how it started off. My mom was a housewife all her life. So I think things changed dramatically when I moved to Singapore to start my PhD. And that's when I was confident enough to start earning, taking care of my mom. I could bring her over there to live with me because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving her alone in India. So things started changing. And I think if you've gone through such hardships in life, as an entrepreneur, you can actually use all of that experience a lot. Because as an entrepreneur, as a CEO of a company, you're going to face more down days than up days. So there are days when you're like banging your head against the wall and you're like, what have I done with my life? What am I doing? Why did I quit my job that was paying me so well? And even if I've got funding in the company, I'm probably getting a good salary now, but it's like, I have to grow this company. It's on my shoulders, right? So I'm answerable to all the stakeholders. I'm answerable if the technology doesn't work. So it's a lot of things around. It's a lot of people management. Honestly, when you work in an organization, yes, you might be managing certain types of people, certain number of people, but if you are the CEO and a founder of a company, you're managing all your stuff. But it's all about understanding and listening to people. A lot of bosses don't listen to people. And for me, I take the time to listen to them. And this I've learned through my hardships in life. It's not just, out of the blue, I've not become an entrepreneur and a CEO. It's through life's teachings and all of it that I've got here. I've faced so much down in my life that even a small up now is time to celebrate for me. So it's kind of like that.
Absolutely. And there is one part of me that feels like, when we talk about the future, ideally it's diverse. Ideally there's equal opportunities for everybody, right? But would it be fair if I said that in your place, if there was a young white man instead of a brown Asian woman, getting funding would have been way easy?
Definitely, yes. So I think with Shiok, we were lucky or we were blessed because I think it's more of experience between Kai and me and not so much of being Asian. Kai is also Asian. I'm brown and Asian. She's actually Singaporean, Hong Kong ethnicity and so on. But I think for us, we didn't have that problem. But before this, I was trying to set up another business in India, which kind of didn't work out. But I've had an investor like in a meeting and just tell me on my face that if you're a white guy, I would have funded you in the first 5 minutes of you entering this room. And I don't want to swear on the podcast, but I basically swear at him and I said, well, I'm a female. That's what I am. And I really don't need your money. And I stormed out. I was shivering the minute I stepped out of that room. Like I couldn't believe that I'd said that, right? So, but I said it. It had to be said. And honestly speaking, at least for Shiok, we haven't faced that yet. But for my previous ventures, I have. On my face.
That's crazy. That's crazy that he would say that to you, like that he would admit to that.
Well, he laughed after it. So I think he thought that he was joking, but that's what was in his mind, right?
And now you run an all-woman team. So is there
right
a correlation?
No, right now we are. It wasn't intentional. We just have an all-women team, but we're having some guys joining us very soon.
Wow, that's actually really sobering. And I'm glad to note that things are moving forward for you now as an all-women team, with other people joining it as well. Could you tell me a little bit about, is it encouraging to you personally that this new sector, clean meat, cell-based meat, which is still in its infancy of sorts, is it encouraging to you that it does have a lot of diversity in it right now?
Definitely. I mean, we are seeing clean meat companies from Israel, from US, from Europe, from Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, India also soon, I guess. So I love the diversity is there and I love more Asian companies are coming up because, like I said, most of the population lives in Asia. So why not?
Speaking of Indian entrepreneurs, what should they be looking out for? How should they grow their business? What are the sort of pitfalls and sort of hurdles they need to be really mindful of? Because you've done all this.
Yeah, so one thing, at least for me being a scientist and being Indian, I think we are very conscious and scared about networking. Like honestly, if I go to a conference, when I used to go to a conference about 5 years back, I used to be shy to go and speak to a Nobel laureate or someone there or like a famous person there. Like I'm like, if I go there and ask a dumb question, what is he or she going to think about it? Is my accent, understandable to him? And so on. These were all random thoughts that kept going in your head. And as a scientist, I was such an introvert. Like I used to hate talking to people till about 5 years back. So as Indians, as Asians, we have that problem. I think you have to break out of that shell. I used to push myself to attend events so that I can go talk to people. just random events. You won't believe it. Like I used to go for fashion events, food events, science events, whatever it is. And these are all free events. There are a lot of free events happening around India, around Singapore, everything. So I just used to go and talk randomly to people. And you have to let go of that thought that people are going to think you're dumb. Honestly, you're meeting so many people in one day that you might not even remember that person after that. And why do you even care what that person has to tell about you if you're never going to meet that person again? So for entrepreneurs in India, I would definitely say networking is a key for everything. Right from funding to growth to hiring your next employee, it's actually through networking. It's through social media networking or in-person networking and so on. And one more advice that I got from a mentor a couple of years ago that I keep telling everyone else is, if you go to a meeting and if you're speaking with someone, by the end of the meeting, get 3 introductions from that person. Just 3 introductions. That's it. It's different whether you meet the 3 people or not, but you have 3 people to take your lead on to. So networking, introductions, and just go out of the shell and start talking.
You mentioned fashion in there somewhere, and I am fascinated by this side of you, right? Like you have thought a lot about that industry as well, and that's also something that's currently being disrupted with new materials and new methods of production. I wanted to ask you a question. What do you think is changing right now in the consumer markets, which is causing everyone to think of remaking all of these perhaps unsustainable industries like food and fashion and all of these areas?
See, for me, when I was young, I was super fascinated by fur and leather bags and leather shoes and all of it. And yes, I was fascinated that my mom was buying it. My father used to buy it for my mom, and I used to want to carry it. And I think when I was in my early teens, I figured out that it's actually from animals, like the skin of it and the fur of it and so on. And that's when I went out and told my mom actually she should stop using leather and fur. And then she realized it and she stopped. I mean, we are all vegetarians. So then when she knew about it, she kind of stopped. I think it's more of consumer education. We don't realize when we go into a shop, we like a bag, we like a purse, we just buy it. We don't really ask where it is from, how it's made. Even if you ask that guy who's in the shop, he might not know where it is from. So I think it's a lot of consumer education. Now that social media is there, a lot of news is out there. People are starting to realize where their food comes from, where their fashion comes from. And people are starting to ask questions. So once you ask questions, there'll be solutions coming out for it. Because then entrepreneurs realize that there's a problem. Now I can go find a solution for it. So companies are coming up with cell-based leather, cell-based fur, even cell-based cotton. So why not?
Absolutely. And just to mention here that Sandhya also writes a blog about being a curvaceous woman in fashion. So if you feel like you want to check it out, please do. We'll leave links to that in the bio. I think we've managed to touch upon a lot of the journey so far. And I just want to do a little bit of future predictions from you. You know, sustainability is a buzzword. Climate change is a reality we have to face. These technologies are, giving industries that are ripe for disruption a legitimate reason to look at ways to revolutionize what they're doing. How do you think things are going to change in the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, not just for you, not just for companies in this space, but for the whole sector?
I think the change has already started. It started a couple of years back. It's getting accelerated now with a lot of money being put into it, a lot of famous celebrities and people investing their time and money into this. Like, who would have thought Bill Gates and Richard Branson would become vegans and actually support plant-based meat companies? Who would have thought that the biggest meat producer, Tyson Foods in the US, would invest in a clean meat company? And also, they have shut down a couple of their animal farms now to set up plant-based companies there. Who would have thought this will happen? Like, huge organizations are taking that big step. Small organizations like us are coming forward. So the change is already happening. I think we have started off, and there's going to be a huge, huge, huge boom that's going to happen in the next couple of years.
That's wonderful to hear. I was speaking at an event called the Feeding the Future Summit, hosted by The Economist in Singapore this July. And my panel ended with a very interesting question. Will technology alone change everything? Now, in the course of our work, of course, I think about this question all the time. And I think people are sometimes pessimistic about what technology can do or how many people it can affect, because they're thinking too narrowly. If we're focused on feeding 10 billion people in 2050, then it's not just possible for technology to change everything, it's an absolute imperative. It's possible for the same reason that a device which fits in my pocket has 5 million times the storage of the Apollo 11 spacecraft computer which went to the moon. It's possible for the same reason that you can get your genetic report for a few $100 or 20,000 rupees today, while the Human Genome Project took 15 years and over $3 billion 15 years ago. And of course, it's possible for the same reason that Dr. Mark Post is driving down the cost of his burgers to $10 and waiting approval to launch them in the market, even though his research project took $330,000 just 6 years ago.
But in order to get to the point where this kind of technology actually transforms an entire global system, many things need to go right. We need the right kind of talent from biomedicine, from research, from manufacturing, and from business to look at these massive global problems and focus on solutions, like bringing cell-based meat to market. We need investors to understand that there is a huge possibility for financial upside and impact here. And we need governments to create the environment for this change to spread through markets and society. The Indian government has already invested 4.5 crores into a research project for cell-based mutton at the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad, and the government of Maharashtra is supporting us to create a Center of Excellence in Cellular Agriculture at the Institute of Chemical Technology in Mumbai.
Now, these are some promising early steps, but of course there's a long way to go. Globally, the entire cell-based meat industry has only ever received a total of some $75 million, with most of that money going towards those private companies we talked about earlier. Meanwhile, renewable energy received nearly $400 billion just last year. Looking at its potential impact on the world, clean meat should get as much attention and investment as clean energy. If you're interested in building this future together, tweet us at Good Food India or follow our company page on LinkedIn for updates. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am Varun, D7 on Twitter, and VAROONFIVE, Varun5 on Instagram. You can come ask me why.
And if you want to reach out to me, I am Cryptic Caprice on Twitter and Dithring Funambulist on Instagram. Please don't ask me why.
We look forward to having you with us every week. And of course, if you'd like to be a part of accelerating the future, just get in touch. I'm Varun Deshpande.
And I'm Ramya Ramurthy. And this was an episode of Feeding 10 Billion. Join us again next week.
Janice, what do you think couples did before TV was invented?
I don't know, go for walks on the beach, long drives, fancy dinners, have more sex maybe?
But what did we do when we decided to move in together? We debated between the Chromecast and the Fire Stick.
We gave up on sleeping early so we could stay up watching true crime shows.
We got ourselves 3 cat babies.
And basically became the cutest couch potatoes around.
Okay then.
In case you guys still haven't got it, we are a TV crazy, Netflix loving, binge watching Mr. and Mrs.
I'm Anirudh Kuha.
I'm Janice Sequeira.
And if like us, you snort TV for breakfast, lunch and dinner, this is the podcast for you.
Tune in every Thursday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever it is that you get your podcast from. This is
Mr.
and Mrs.
Binge Watch.
Hello, everybody. We have a brand new daily podcast we're working on with Bloomberg Quint. All you need to know provides the top news on business, markets, and the economy so that you can stay ahead of the curve. Tune in every morning on BloombergQuint.com, the IVM Podcast app, or wherever you get your podcast from.